Welcome, everybody, to our training today on the Sartori tools, our new suite of open source digital tools that we'll be sharing with you today. I'm Ashley Moran, based at the University of Texas, and I'm joined here by my colleagues Zach Elkins, Roy Gardner, Andrés Cruz, Matt Martin, and Guillermo Pérez. And we're going to take you through some of our new tools, demo them, talked a little bit about how we're using them, why they seem like they might be useful, hopefully in your work as well. So without further ado, we'll dive in, and Zach's gonna lead us off here.
Great. Thanks, Ashley. It's so great to see people out here. This has been one of the most interesting projects, I think, of my professional career, and it builds on the work of a lot of other people who've come through this project. I see Alex Hudson out there. He's a strong contributor to this. Um, this is the 100th anniversary of Giovanni Sartori's birth. Obviously, thought of as the father of Italian political science, among other things, worked on constitutions, political parties, but more than anything else, I think he worked on concepts, and I think he enlightened us as one of the first generation of political scientists to get people excited about analyzing and using concepts in a really systematic way. And so this builds on his work. Of course, there are many others who've come after him, including David Collier, who've pushed this. And I think we want to push this into the digital era, where, of course, there are a lot of tools that are just tailor-made for this kind of work. Um, Concepts, obviously incredibly important. It's the language we use to build ideas. They represent ideas, so using them wisely can facilitate knowledge generation, but also sharing, conveying knowledge systematically. And we've been working on this in the context of constitutions, but one could work on this really in any domain of social science and beyond. So, Andres, next slide. Uh, what we're going to talk about today are a set of tools that, as I mentioned, have general application to anybody working on a corpus of text. Um, in particular, we're refining those tools for people working on comparative law. And people out there, obviously, all of us want to do a little bit of outreach and work with people building constitutions and writing law. And courts and practitioners and institution builders are a big part of our audience as well. Next, please, Andres. I think the next one of the motivation is this website, which we built in 2013, which is a spin-off of the data that we've been collecting on constitutions since 2005. And this is just an indexed repository of the world's constitutions, and emphasis on indexed, since anybody can put together a repository, but what we're focused on in this project is concepts and understanding the ideas that are in constitutions. And um, so I'll give you an example. Chile, Andres. By the way, all of us are really uh, enthusiastic about Chile for various reasons. Some of us are Chilean, others are just fascinated by this country. But there have been, four drafts, as you probably know. It's been ground zero for constitution writing over the last 5 years. There have been four drafts that have been put together in various stages of development, and we've been analyzing them. And one thing we realized quite quickly, and we have all four drafts up on Constitute for your reading pleasure if you have trouble sleeping tonight. But one thing we realized quite quickly was that our ontology, as we call it, that is our taxonomy, our set of concepts, was far outstripped by the ideas that were being generated in Chile. So, as this headline indicates, there are about 120 rights, as we count them, in one of the drafts. Uh, and we track about 90 rights. So there are concepts out there that we're not aware of, or at least we don't track, and we need to track because people writing constitutions need to be able to represent those ideas and grapple with those ideas somehow. And for better or for worse, Constitute has become one of the places, at least, that people use to learn about ideas and think through their options. So next, I'll give you an example, Andres, if you would. Um, one of the rights that came out of one of the drafts had to do with the regulation of parenthood. And those of us who are parents realize that for the most part, the state, for better for worse, uh, doesn't intervene in our affairs, but sometimes they do, and sometimes that's for understandable reasons injected into constitutions, given how important the development of children is. And so this right found its way into one of the drafts, the draft put together by the Constitutional Council, and it essentially gave parents quite a bit of leeway in governing the lives of their children, mostly in terms of schools, et cetera. We didn't have that concept, that topic, parents, but we realized constitutional drafters wanted to deal with it, so we need to include it in our ontology. So next, please, Andres. So we did so, and we added that topic, and now you can search across constitutions. Next, please, Andres, and find options out there if you were to craft a law regarding the rights of parents. Next, please, Andres. As you can imagine, a big part of what we're doing here is disambiguating, that is, comparing and contrasting and building concepts off one another. And you could imagine there are lots of other rights related to parents, most directly the rights of children, which are another part of the equation, obviously. And we had that topic, the rights of children, as you can see here. Here's just the description. If you hover over the taxonomy, you can see the description of the topic. So next, Andres. In addition to rights of children, there are some others. Well, one back before that, Andres, I think. There's also uh, another concept related to the state protection of children. And then next, you can also on Constitute search up any keyword, of course, and if you search that string, you can find text related to something to that string, and then of course you can do that. And also surface other topics that are related to, in this case, the keyword child. So all that to say is we have an application that when we can identify a topic that is new and needs to be added to our ontology, we can do so, and other people can have access to it. And theoretically, people writing constitutions can think about adding that topic. Okay, next, Andres. It's just another view of Constitute. You can do paired comparisons in addition to finding a list of excerpts across all constitutions. If in this case, you wanted to compare the 2022 Chilean draft to the 2023 draft, it's a very inside baseball kind of thing, I guess, if you're really into the Chilean process. But you'd see here, of course, that the 2022 draft, which is the more progressive one, didn't regulate parenthood, whereas the 2023 did, or at least provide rights to parents. Okay, next. Um, okay, I'm going to leave it there, but all this to say that this is part of a suite of things that the five of us have been, and more, and previous members of this project have been working on for years. We've got data of various kinds, and including not just the interpretations of constitutions, but other aspects of constitutions. We try to be involved in providing resources to those writing constitutions. And the project we're talking about here is funded by the NSF, and the whole idea is to build a set of tools to allow people to do what we're doing with other genres. So I'll leave it there and hand it over to Andres. You could talk about one of the tools.
Excellent. Thanks, Zach. Yes, I'm happy to be talking about the first tool of this suite of concept integration tools. And this one's called Sartori.network. And it's a website that is following one of Sartori's pieces of advice. So he said, when you're working with concepts as we are, one of the first things that you need to do is to um, map what's out there, see what's out there, how are other scholars thinking about this concept. As it happens, many research teams might be working with similar concepts, and one of the first steps for us would be, okay, what are people doing? Can we map this conceptual ecology? And perhaps we took this advice too literally because we are in this project, we actually try to map this collection of concepts that's out there. So in this website, you get to interact with it. And the idea is that we have this map, this collection, in which each dot is a concept that's coming from a given ontology. So here the ontologies are different colors, and you can see how different ontologies are defining this concept and discover these connections. Um, you can filter ontologies. So perhaps you just want to focus on one of these. At the moment, we have 10 ontologies here. We wish we'll have more in the near future. But you can, maybe you're only interested in the constitutional ontologies or maybe in others that relate to democracy. You can do that here. Um, my favorite feature of this, the one that I'm most excited about, is that in real time, you can add a concept that you're working on and see how it fits in this collection of concepts from different ontologies. So here I'm adding, for example, referendum, and I'm comparing it with other definitions of referendum, referenda, and other related direct democracy concepts that are already out there. I just wanted to briefly go over what's happening here behind the scenes. So our very first step, of course, is to gather this collection of ontologies. We construct a standardized schema to represent them. And this is all open source. This is a repository that has instructions so that hopefully anyone can submit their own ontology and see it graphed here in our Sartori.network platform. Um, then we take those ontologies and we have to represent them into numbers so that we can do all these things with them. And to do that, we use a language model. Importantly, we use a multilingual model so that we can collect ontologies from different languages. And that works seamlessly. If you're trying to add a new concept, you can try it in your language of choice. And now, then, after we have those numerical representations, we end up with a matrix of like n concepts by 124 dimensions, and we can project that into a map, which is what you're seeing here. And the idea is that concepts are clustered according to meaning, more or less, right? So closer concepts that are closer together in meaning are also closer together in the map. That helps with visualization. Finally, we can take this matrix and compute pairwise distances. Here we are using just cosine similarity, and that allows us to get these connections between concepts so that we can identify the concepts that are most closely related, including for the user or the concepts that you add in real time to the network. How can you use this? We would love for people to submit their ontologies so that this becomes an established repository of not only 10, but hopefully 10, 20, 30, 100 ontologies. That would be very cool. You can, of course, play with it, visualize connections, maybe identify gaps or concepts that are not here in existing ontologies. Again, what I'm most excited about, you can compare aspiring concepts that maybe you want to use in your research against what's already out there in your language of choice. Yeah, that's pretty much it. You can go now to Sartori.network or later today and test it for yourself. We have a little tutorial in there. We have a little bit more on the methodology that's gonna come up later in this talk today. That's my 5-minute introduction to this tool. Hopefully, you'll find it useful. And I'll now pass the baton to Guillermo.
Hi, thank you, Andres. I will show you today the Constitution Comparison tool. This tool tries to, or is designed to, in simple terms, to do two principal methods. First, a textual alignment, and second, a thematic alignment. Together, these approaches try to provide a more complete picture of how constitutions relate to one another. In simple terms, next slide, Andres, please. In simple terms, textual alignment allows to compare language directly as specific words and phrases, and thematic alignment asks whether the constitutions emphasize the same topics, regardless of how these topics are written. Here we are comparing the constitutional agendas and priorities rather than the specific language. So here we have two methods, a method that measures textual alignment and a method that measures thematic alignment. We can delve in the specific about the methodology in the Q&A, but in general, the important thing is that we have two methods, a method that measures textual alignment and a method that measures thematic alignment. I will show you some results. Next slide, please, Andrés. And the next one, please. I will show you some results applying this tool to a concrete case. We applied it to the Chilean case, which we found it especially interesting since the Chile's constitutional struggles in recent years offer a unique case and a unique opportunity to study constitutional evolution and reform failure. So we also include two comparative cases, the Bolivian Constitution and the Ecuadorian Constitution, because they represent the Latin American constitutionalism movement that is really Latin American. So we use these cases as a comparative to the Chilean processes. So our corpus include the current Chilean Constitution of 1980, consolidated in 2021, and the multiple attempts to reform it, the draft of 2023, the draft of 2022, and the draft of 2018. Let me give you some context. The Chilean Constitution dates back to 1980 and was enacted during the dictatorship of Augusto Pinochet. And there has been multiple attempts to replace it. The most well-known was the 2022 draft, which was described by some people as the most progressive draft in the world. However, there were other drafts as well. In 2018, during the President Michelle Bachelet administration, a draft was produced at a time when public demand for constitutional change was really low. So the differences between that draft and the current constitution were not very substantial, and in 2023 there was another replacement attempt, more conservative in orientation, following the failure of the 22 progressive draft. And all these drafts were included in this analysis. And for that reason, we can describe the 2018 Bachelet draft and the 2023 draft the constitutional continuity with the current constitution, or at least the conservative approaches, we called it, while the 2022 draft can be characterized as the more progressive constitution. So let's turn to the textual similarity results that we see in our exercise. Next slide, please. Yes. This figure measures the proportion of text in each pair of constitutions that is highly similar. Specifically, each bar answered the following question. If we compare these two constitutions, how much similarity is there between their articles and provisions? A longer bar obviously means that many parts of the text are nearly identical. So, for example, the comparison between the Chile current constitution, the Chile 2021 and Chile 2018 are nearly identical, and something similar happened between the Chile current constitution, Chile 2021, and Chile 2023, and there are also a big similarity between Chile 2018 and Chile 2023. Next slide, please, Andrés. The next figure is a heat map of integral values, and darker colors represent higher similarity. And the numbers are integral values, which in our case can be interpreted as probabilities. For example, 0.63 means that if I randomly select a constitutional provision, there is a 60 3% probability that it will be highly similar between the two texts that are being compared, for example. Again, the same pattern appears. The stronger similarities are between the current constitution and the 2018 draft, then between the current constitution and the 23 draft, and then between the 2018 draft and 2023 draft. Next slide, please, Andres. Now, this figure shows the distribution of textual similarity between pairs of constitutions estimated by kernel density estimation. On the x-axis, we can see the similarity scores, and in the y-axis, we can see the density. A high peak means that many articles cluster around that similarity value. So what is really the two peaks in the curves. And interesting because the two peaks suggest a more conservative drafting strategy. Some provisions remain intact while other provisions are substantially reformed. And these patterns is often consistent with political compromises, evolutionary reform, and negotiation among actors. We see this pronounced by modality between the current constitution, Chile 2021, and the Bachelet draft, Chile 2018, and it's also present, thought less pronounced in the comparison between the current constitution and the 2023 draft, and between the 2018 draft and 2023 draft. Alignment in the next slide. This figure presents a heat map of topic profile correlations using Pearson coefficient, and the Pearson coefficient measures whether constitutions prioritize similar topics, rank them similarly. When the value is high, it means that both constitutions assign high importance to a similar range of topics and prioritize them in a similar way. So for example, if constitutions A emphasize health, education, and indigenous right in that order, and constitution B emphasize the same topics in the same order, the Pearson correlation will be high. So here we can see the continuity between the current constitution and the 2023 draft, and between the 2018 draft and the 2023 draft. Again, the same situation. And we can see then in the cosine correlation, the same situation. In the next slide, please, Andres. Something that is interesting here is the relationship between the similarity between Bolivia and Ecuador. That is because the close connection between the two countries and the wave of indigenous constitutionalism in the late 2000s. These constitutions were drafted under similar constitutional ideas and ideological inspiration. So that's the relationship between those two constitutions. And the last thing I'm going to say, because I'm talking more than 5 minutes, is that the real power that comes from using the two methods. When you combine the thematic alignment and the textual alignment, that's the real power that comes from the method. For example, when you see high thematic alignment, but only moderate textual alignment, this tells us that two constitutions prioritize the same topic, but express them in different language. When you see textual similarity is moderate, but thematic similarity is lower, the constitutions share constitutional boilerplate and formulaic language, but differ in their substantive priorities. But when both are high, when the thematic similarity and the textual similarity are high, we see genuine textual borrowing with topic overlap. And that's the case in the three Chilean conservative or continuity constitutions. The Chile 2021, that's the current constitution, the Chile 2018 draft, and the Chile 2023 draft. And when both are low, we are looking fundamentally different constitutional projects. So that's the relevant thing about when you combine the methods. And the last thing is the possibilities that this method that can give you. You can use it for constitutional drafting, for reform analysis, for comparative constitutionalism, for political science, for legal scholarship. And this tool comparison, this constitutional comparison tool is designed to be flexible. You can apply these methods for constitutional text, but you also can apply it for different kind of text, and you can adjust your parameters for research questions. You can use them for different kind of texts and different kinds of analysis. And you can find a video in our YouTube channel, Constitute Project YouTube channel, with all this explanation in much more detailed. And you can find the link to our GitHub repository in that YouTube video, where you can download all the information and use this method in your computer and try to, I don't know, explore it. Now it's Matt's turn, I think.
Yes, it is. All right. Hello, everybody. I'll be speaking to you about the segments as topic tool, which we refer to as the SAT method. So, Andres, if you could move to the next slide, please. I'll just provide a quick description of what we're doing here. You can think of the SAT method as a hybrid approach to topic discovery and integration in textual corpora. And the idea, the motivation was for us to find a balance between computational efficiency and human expertise, right? So this methodology combines automated natural language processing with domain expertise, in this case in the constitutional realm, to identify and assess candidate topics for inclusion in the CCP vocabulary. But as I'll talk about, this has other use cases as well. So really what we're doing here is creating new topics in this example, assessing the best formulation of a potential new topic, and then identifying that topic throughout the corpus, hence the name segments as topics, right? And by the end of it, producing a exhaustive, semi-exhaustive set of matching segments in this interface that I have a screenshot up on the screen right now. If we can move to the next slide, Andres. So here, before we get started with this video, if you could just pause for just a moment, Andres. This is going to move quite fast, and I'll preface this by saying there's also a video tutorial that lasts about 15 minutes on YouTube. I'll drop a link at the end of my portion of the presentation. But what we'll focus on in this quick video tutorial piece, let's say, is the SAT generation side of things. So at this stage in the tool, there's some setup, obviously, in the prior steps. But what we'll be doing here is formulating and refining a distinct topic, again, using the rights and duties of parents as an example here, and then retrieving corpus segments semantically aligned with this candidate topic. Then we'll move on to expansion, finding additional segments, and iteratively accepting them into the SAT, as it were, and also creating a rejection set at the same time. We'll then move on to the third stage, SAT review, where we have expert evaluation of the topic for inclusion in the vocabulary, which is ended with SAT integration. So actually putting it into our ontology or our vocabulary, which means automatic tagging of all segments in the final set with that new topic. So I'll ask Andres to press play, and I'll just highlight a few things as we move throughout here. So obviously this shows the interface. What we'll be doing in this first step is typing in parents, the topic key, setting some thresholds, and then providing a phrase that captures the intent of the topic, the rights and duties of parents. What we'll see next is that we run the search process, we use our topic key, we have our formulation, we have our thresholds, and it produces a set of results that we'll review for the construction of what we call the seed set, or the set of segments that we're using to define the initial core of the topic of interest here. So you'll notice on the right side, I'll have the ability to click the accept box if I want to include certain segments within the seed set. Obviously, this requires some judgment as to what does and what does not constitute the conceptual core of what we're looking at. Once I've reached a point where I'm happy with that initial seed set, we'll move on to expansion. And this is where the iterative component comes in. So you'll see that we have 6 segments in this initial seed set. We'll go through another step of setting initial, a supplementary search and cluster thresholds. And then we'll pass through X number of stages where we essentially run this iteratively. We'll look through topics, the segments that come up for this particular topic, accept and reject some, continue to add segments to that set, with the idea being that after a certain number of rounds where we continue to accept segments found by the semantic search technology, that we'll reach a exhaustive or a semi-exhaustive list of segments comprising the SAT for a given topic. Again, in this particular case, the rights and duties of parents. So for the purpose of this example, I didn't have all the time in the world to just go through and accept all of the relevant segments, right? But ostensibly, when you get through a certain number of stages, here we're on round 3, I believe, you continue to see how many segments you've accepted in a given round, the size of the SAT as you move to the next stage. And if you could press play, Andrés, so we'll move on to the last stages of the methodology here. So it'll tell you once the process is terminated, you'll then pass on to the SAT review stage, where you'll be able to review all of the segments that you've accepted up until this point to make sure that you're happy with the set of segments that you've effectively created through this iterative process. Now, if there are a few that say I'm not happy with, I want to exclude from the final set, I can do that just as I've done a second ago. And once we're happy with it, we'll produce a label, we'll write the description for the topic, and you can export all of your results, that is all of the segments, to a CSV file for downstream analysis, for what have you. So if you could move on to the next slide, Andrés. So the last thing I'll say here is, as I mentioned at the outset, there is a video tutorial that goes into much greater detail about how to set this all up, how to conduct analysis using the SAT tool. I'll drop the link in the chat. And the last thing I'll say is that this doesn't necessarily have to be just applied to expanding an existing vocabulary, but ostensibly you could use these tools to create an entirely fresh vocabulary, right? So long as you have a corpus that you process using the tools that we've provided here, you can really start from square zero, which I plan to do in some of my own projects outside of the CCP. So I'll leave it there.
Thank you so much, Matt. Okay, so I'm going to move to talking a little bit about how we've been applying these tools in our own work, to provide some concrete examples in the hopes that you might see some possibilities in your work. We've been applying these tools in a couple ways. One, on the technical side, working to expand the topics that we track in constitutions to account for new topics that are coming up in constitutions increasingly in recent years, but also those constitutions that are being raised in public debates, in courts, court rulings, and then to track those topics in our texts, our constitutional texts that you saw on Constitute, as Zach showed. And really, as Matt and Guillermo and Andres described, the effort is to systematize this process internally in our own work of adding new topics and applying them to texts in our corpus, and to integrate this process of automated tagging with human checks and to document all of that. As Matt just went through, all of that is documented for us. So we have a record of, why we decided to formulate a topic in a specific way, what we include, exclude, which segments within our constitutions it applies to, why we decided to include or exclude some of those constitutional provisions in that topic set, et cetera. So internally, this has really helped us to standardize our use of automated tagging and our process and document that. On the substantive side, we've been working to link these constitutional topics in our now expanded set of topics that we track across different sets of texts in the constitutional domain. So covering different phases of constitutional development. So not only the constitutional texts we've been tracking, of course, but also what comes before them. So public consultation, drafting deliberations, also what comes after them. So court rulings and interpretations of those texts. So our effort is really to make these huge volumes of text that are produced at each of these stages, the actual constitutions, the drafting phase, court interpretation, just more accessible to drafters and policymakers that might be wanting to take decisions based on these voluminous sets of text. So people who maybe want to consider public input in drafting or want to consider lessons learned through court interpretation of specific constitutional topics, but can't read through the thousands of documents that have this information. So in keeping with our theme, we have been piloting this on the Chilean constitutional process because of the volume of documents that are available by studying this in real time, right? We've been able to access all of those drafts, all of the deliberations, the committee and plenary sessions, et cetera. So it's been a wealth of data to explore these tools across many phases of the constitutional process. So next slide. So as we know, the public consultation process is so important, but it produces a huge volume of narrative input that is notoriously difficult for drafters and others to analyze. This is certainly true in Chile, where there was extensive consultation across 3 reform efforts, hundreds of thousands of narrative public comments, and meeting transcripts, making this incredibly difficult to analyze. So we've collected all of these narrative data, indexed them with the topics you've heard about from all of my colleagues' prior presentations, and are using these tools to analyze them. So next slide. So this allows us to systematically analyze this huge volume of narrative public input and compare it to other sets of text, other corpora. So just as a snapshot here, this is a comparison of the rights raised in national constitutions on the left in red, and the rights raised in Chilean consultation responses in green on the right. And we can see there is a very different focus, right? So Chilean constituents had a much larger focus on equality, particularly gender equality, environmental rights, freedom of expression, equal pay for equal work, right to life. And this provides important input for constitution drafters. So next slide. And we've also collected and indexed the hundreds of plenary and committee meetings that were part of the Chilean drafting deliberations across all 3 drafting processes to see if, for example, the topics raised in public consultations associated with that reform effort are raised by drafters. And of course, we can assess also the full scope of topics that are raised in each of these phases. Next slide. And we've also collected the thousands of Chilean Constitutional Court rulings over nearly 5 decades. So using these digital tools has allowed us to identify and compare our full set of constitutional topics across each of these stages of constitutional development. So we can see, what are the topics raised in each stage and then across those stages too. So for example, just looking at some court rulings. So next slide. So this is just a snapshot showing the topics raised across all of those Chilean Constitutional Court rulings since 1970. And indexing those with constitutional topics allows us to track those topics across all of those rulings systematically to see, this is just here a count of how often topics come up over these 5 decades. So for example, we're looking here at the Comparative Constitutions Project topics listed there on the left, and the years that the Chilean Constitutional Court has been active after 1970, and how often those topics came up. And so we can see waves of topics addressed by the court, right? So when did the court start addressing key topics? Often after constitutional reforms, often after expansion of court powers, changes in the socio-political landscape. So just to highlight a couple key phases here, next slide. So in the early years, we can see that here in this red box, I highlight here, the early years of the Constitutional Court's docket were really focused on state institutions. So the legislature, the court's own power, jurisdiction, the head of state issues, and the relationship between those institutions. So the scope of their powers, approval, veto, the constitutionality of laws. So next slide. But then we see, beginning in the 1980s, leading up to the democratic transition, the court starts to pave the way for some democratic change. So it starts taking up, for the first time, some key issues that help lay the foundation for changes incrementally towards the democratic transition. So the court starts addressing issues related to campaign finance, to political party regulations, to access to TV and media, the voting age, equality issues. So next slide. And then we see another big shift, which is not unsurprising, but this gives us some systematic information on the court's docket at that time. We see another big shift after the transition in 1990, where the court starts addressing for the first time a wide range of democratic rights. So freedom of association, dignity, right to culture, educational rights, parental rights, which as Zach noted, we just started tracking, so we can now see political party rights, voting rights, economic rights, even right to start a business, etc. So again, this just is a bit of a starting place for us. It allows us to systematically look at the topics raised across these huge volumes of text, and start diving in, right? Where we see these patterns, we can now start looking at these rulings that we've indexed, pull out all of those rulings that address a particular issue, and see exactly what the court is ruling on those. So our current work is really looking, exploring these data within each of these document sets, but also linking across these corpora, as I noted. So comparing the topics raised across each of these phases of constitutional development. So public consultations to drafting deliberations to the constitution drafts, as Guillermo noted, to court rulings on the adopted constitution. And we're looking at that across all three phases of the Chilean reform efforts. So this allows us to see, for example, which topics were most important to Chileans in each phase. How did that change maybe over time? Whether drafters leveraged public input, either substantively or rhetorically in the drafting deliberations. So maybe that could give us some insight into how the structure, the composition of each drafting body maybe addressed public consultation input more or not. Whether the design then of these consultation bodies kind of shapes the resulting constitutional text. Even whether topics raised in prior court rulings are now being taken up in new constitutional drafts or text. So these are some of the questions we're exploring. We hope maybe you will see some utility in your own work. Next slide. And hope you might. We're going to turn it to Q&A. We want to hear from you, but I'm just going to put these few ways to continue connecting with us after this on the radar screen. The first one there, of course, links to our tools, the repositories. As my colleagues noted, you can access the repositories, start using them in your own work. We hope you can use this Sartori platform to be analyzing the conceptual landscape of law and political science, where these different research projects overlap. As Andres noted, hopefully submit your own ontologies. It's very easy. I've used it myself. You just go on and upload your ontology there, and we double check it, and then it appears on the Sartori.network site. I see some of my colleagues on this call. We've already included yours in the ontology repo. We have several topic sets from the Comparative Constitutions Project, from International IDEA, from the Nucleo Constitucional in Chile, Others we've pulled from our own research in working with other court data sets, and we want to know about yours. We would love to include your concepts there. So I'm going to leave it there and just hand it over, start with Q&A. We would love to hear from you and just hear what you're thinking about this or any questions we can answer. And Andres, maybe do we want to stop sharing so we can kind of see everybody? If people have questions, feel free to raise your hand or send questions in the chat. We can handle it either way. Beckett, want to jump in?
Yeah. Hi, can you hear me?
Yes, perfect.
Great. Thanks for this presentation. This has been really interesting and really valuable. I have a couple of questions. Depending on the time, maybe other people can go and I'll jump back in. But the first one is, so when you're tracking topics in a text, how can you talk more about how the software that you're using or the method that you're using identifies the semantic content of of a text, how it defines that? This is a question that kept on popping up to me, both at the end when you were talking about reading the topics in judicial cases, and also in the beginning when Andres was talking about translating an ontology, uploading an ontology into the system. It was not clear to me how the system is able to grasp that, what the semantic content is of any one of those, ontological pieces. So if you could just talk about that more, that'd be very helpful.
Yeah, I think Matt and Andres, do you want to jump in? You all have each of your tools kind of do this in different ways.
Yeah, maybe I can start. So I was just grappling with this question for the paper corresponding to the SAT tool, and I'll explain it in a few different ways. So really our unit of analysis, as it were, when using the SAT tool and throughout these tools is what we call a segment of text. Now, what I mean by a segment of text is a sentence level segment. And what we use for the segmentation process is what's called a spacey model. Now, I won't get too in the weeds about the specific methodology for how they parse segments with these spacey models, but it's called a dependency parser. It basically uses the natural syntactic structure of the text to know when, we should cut off here, start there, et cetera, et cetera. And fortunately, when it comes to constitutional texts, this is a bit easier because we're working with more formalistic, more legalistic language that sometimes makes the segmentation process a little more cut and dry than, say, social media text that is just by its very nature noisier. But that's not to say that it's impossible, just a different task, as it were. And yeah, basically those are the segments that you would see in the interface for the SAT tool. And then you would go about tagging it with whatever topics you might have. Andres, do you have more to add?
Yeah. So the meaning of a sentence is, of course, a multifaceted thing, right? Like there are all sorts of ways in which sentences mean different things to us depending on context and whatnot. And of course, we can only approximate that using numeric methods. And what we are relying on here is language models. So this is the same technology that's behind like chatbots, like ChatGPT and Claude and whatnot. We are not using the generative aspect of these technologies, so we're not really asking it to generate text. But we're asking we are using one of the foundational technologies behind that, which is embeddings. So the idea is that the very first step that those models need to do in order to work with text is to convert them into numbers, into these numeric representations. And they've been trained on large corpora of text. So this originally was something like Wikipedia, but now they're trained on like basically everything on the internet. So they can condense the meaning of text, contextualized into these in our case, 1,024 vectors of meaning that then we can compare and maybe compute like pairwise similarity with. This is an inexact process, and the we always strive to get human validation. So this is what Matt was referring to.
Yeah.
We observe the tools, we have this iterative process in which we receive this feed. Like you cannot do all those pairwise comparisons by yourself. Like there's too many of them. The computer can, and it's going to have some margin of error. And then we introduce that human in the loop that's like reviewing the results. That's I think very important. So there's this computational component that's somewhat mysterious. This model is very good. It's been trained on a lot of text and it usually gets it right. But we know the context better. We know what we're after. We know what the goal is. So I think that combination is really key for something like this to really capture the meaning behind the text.
Mhm. And the last thing that I'll add here is that the approach that we've developed is model agnostic, we like to say, and that we use the universal sentence encoder as a way to provide these numerical representations of these sentence level segments. But, provided a new model comes down the pipeline that is way more efficient, way more accurate, way more precise, et cetera, the approach that we've developed would allow us to substitute whatever model we're using at a given point in time with that newer model. And in fact, in some of our prior research, we've actually used version 3 of the universal sentence encoder precisely because it allows for sentence level embeddings that are multilingual, i.e. for Spanish language text, for example.
Okay, thank you. That's very helpful. Yeah, please go ahead.
Oh, sorry, no, I'll add one thing. So we've experimented with different ways to conceptualize the topics we search for in text. So, for example, one approach could be just using the topic label itself. A second approach is using the topic label plus the description. The first option was discarded immediately. We really need more for the technology to go on than just a word or a few words, right? So having a more substantive description of the meaning of that topic was really important. So a lot of our work was really focused on using the topic and the description from the Comparative Constitutions Project topics as our way of searching. I'll say, secondly, then a big part of our work now has been grappling with these different kinds of text, right? Constitutions. Using constitutional topics to search for content in constitutions is one thing. Using those constitutional topics to search for those topics in other types of text, like narrative public input, that can be, there are a lot of non sequiturs. They, people like kind of change their topic midstream. They talk in a different way than constitutions are structured, et cetera. Similarly, applying those constitutional topics to search for content in court rulings is likewise a totally different animal, right? The courts are, again, the content is structured in a different way, but also they often refer implicitly to the topic we're searching for rather than dealing with it head on because, they're talking to an audience that knows about those concepts, right? So rather than, anyhow, so it's just different kinds of text. So the approach that Matt described in the segments as topic tool has been a really important development for us. So the process of using constitutional topics and their descriptions is one way to find content. Then we use those to find and identify the segments in constitutions that represent that topic. So using the Constitution text itself to then find in turn additional constitutional segments that match that content. So you're using the language of the Constitution to find more sections of the Constitution that match that. And then we in turn, as we moved into court rulings, used those to identify court ruling segments that matched those constitutional topics. And so again, using court ruling segments as the topics to in turn search that court ruling corpus, which was game changing. It identified so many more topics because it's using the language of the document itself to find other content that has a similar semantic meaning. It still requires our CCP topic set because that's a stage in getting to and identifying that content that represents that constitutional topic. But through that process, we're able to find, search terms, essentially, those court segments that are more effective in finding other court segments that are similar. So we have a few different approaches and a few different ways that we hope, would be useful in for others working with completely different corpora, whether it's different facets of comparative law or religious texts or whatever you're studying, right? We're developing a process to kind of hone those constitutional topics to be applicable in searching for text in different kinds of texts.
That's great. Thank you.
Alex, you want to jump in?
Yeah, I have a question about how to use this in a new case. So first, thanks so much for the presentations, and it's really great to see what you're working on, and great to see people I know and have worked with in the past and appreciate. So I was thinking, how do we apply this to a completely new research project? And I'll give you an example, like legislation that is copied but different. So, in the US states, there was that ALEC project that was basically giving model legislation. That's sort of one thing. But a different thing that is, I think, more interesting is the proliferation in foreign agent laws across Europe and other regions. As an example, there's this foreign agent law in Georgia that's very repressive. Canada brought in a foreign agent law last year, or 2024, actually. They addressed a similar topic in a different way. And I wonder how much we would get out of comparing the texts. Obviously, that's only half the story, because then there's the implementation or the application of the law. But just the text itself, I think that'd be interesting. But obviously, we have the linguistic problem. That's the first step, but it sounds like this is solvable. But then secondly, we don't have an ontology for foreign agent laws. And so it sounds like the segments as topics tool would help me to develop the ontology. But of course, it's a very narrow topic. I'm using topic in a very loose way. It's a narrow scope of legislation. And I don't know off the top of my head what the topics would be within a foreign agent law. So anyway, this is a long question, hypothetical, but I would just like to hear from you. If I said, okay, I'm going to launch into a new project on foreign agent laws, I want to know how similar they are, what the ontology is, and so forth. How would I proceed through the different tools you've described for us?
So I'll start, and I'm sure others have additional comments. So we've been doing something similar recently with academic freedom documents, and essentially, which similarly requires a completely new or a largely new ontology, because it raises additional topics that aren't reflected yet in the CCP ontology. And so what our colleague Roy Gardner has been doing is using these tools to identify, to kind of cluster topics and kind of go from the ground up, instead of using the CCP ontology to identify topics. Instead, go from the ground up and identify the topics that are arising. And then from there, you could use the tools, for example, that Guillermo introduced, comparing texts along the textual similarity, meaning are they actually borrowing text? Are they replicating text exactly? Or the thematic similarity, is it different wording but a similar meaning? So you could be searching for those new topics across those texts. Zach, you want to jump in too?
Yeah, I just want to add to that, and what I think is two or three things. I think one of the biggest problems and hurdles in working with concepts and indexing them is just the kind of the platform problem, in that it has to be a place and a way of interacting with these data that's actually enjoyable. And working with concepts is really enjoyable, but you have to be able to add concepts, refine them, subtract them, merge them, split them with your other concepts. And I don't think, even the tools we have right now, there's a great place to work with those concepts in tandem with the text you might be working with. And so, we have great ways to generate and discover topics, but we don't yet have a place to really work with the ontology and move things around. And that's going to change in the next 1 month, because as Ashley mentioned, we're going to launch a collection of academic freedom documents along with another corpus that Tom Ginsberg has put together. and his team on international charters. And we're calling this thing Linnaeus. And Alex, you know about it. We've been talking about it for 10 years as agnostic constitute, like a general platform to put these things together. And it's going to be amazing, in part because you have sort of a good way to interact with these concepts, but it's going to function as a nice publishing platform in some ways. Like I feel like we're moving into online publishing in which somebody could put together a corpus of documents, publish them with a really refined index, work with the index and concepts, and put that out there. And so we're going to launch with 3 corpora next month, and then invite people to join and publish their corpus in on this platform. And Alex, I think the legislative documents would be a nice addition to that. And I think what you're moving towards is like a cross corpus comparison, and I think that's something that could happen once we have a bunch of corpora up there on this platform. You can imagine sharing ontologies, and then of course comparing text.
And I would like to make one small addition to the conversation. I think that if we want to be really concrete, as to the example that you proposed, Alex, say you are looking at the foreign actor statute recently passed in Georgia, right? And you saw that there was a particular component of that law that made it very unique in some way. And you wanted to see amongst the other foreign actor laws passed by other countries if that subcomponent is also present in those other statutes internationally. You could very well use the SAT tool to effectively, you know, take bits and pieces of that subcomponent, use that to define the initial search phrase or topic that you use to search through the segments, or rather the corpus of interest, and then see, if indeed using the tools, if anything pops up with similar, semantically similar language, and then go from there. You can be really inductive is what I'm trying to say here, right? You can just, take bits and pieces of the text as it appears in certain segments, or rather certain corpora. You can throw it into the search tool and really take it however you please.
Thanks very much.
Oh, Ashley, I think.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Other questions? We're really interested to hear just like this, what issues you're working on, research projects where you might see anything like this being applicable. As Zach alluded to, we're really interested in creating tools that, are not only useful in our individual research, but are useful to the community of public law scholars to which we all belong, and are creating a place for us to share topics, ontologies, documents. So we're very interested in the research you all are working on. And I should say also on the our GitHub repos that are linked in the slides, which we'll share with all participants after this. There are, as was mentioned, video tutorials to take you through this. There is, a host of sample data to use, and just kind of experimenting with this as you start to use the tool before you add your own. There's also Matt's email, so you can just contact him anytime, day or night, to ask your questions, large or small. But we really want to hear what you're working on. So Natalia, you want to go?
Yes. Hi, good morning, everyone. Can you hear me well?
Yes, perfect.
All right. So I'm currently working on a project on Brazil's Constituent Assembly in the 80s. And I've been using a large archive of citizen letters that were sent to the Constituent Assembly to study how popular economic demands were incorporated or reframed or constrained in the final constitutional text. And I found your work on public consultation data in Chile especially useful for thinking about this. And I have a question on that because I agree that sentence level embeddings are well suited for this type of data. But since I'm working with historical material that is organized in a very uneven and sometimes chaotic way, I was wondering whether there are some certain types of constitutional demands, for example, those that are expressed through historically coded language or implicit claims or even irony that remain especially difficult to capture with these embeddings, and how you think we should deal with those limits. And also, relatedly, since you've worked on comparing public consultation data to multiple drafts of the Chilean constitutions, I'd love to hear a bit about the main challenges of building a sequential design like that, just out of curiosity. Thank you.
Well, I could jump in maybe on that consultation piece, and then maybe Guillermo or others if you want to talk about constitutions. So on the consultation data that we've been working with in Chile, it's similar in the sense that it is very uneven in terms of how it was collected, what the format is. It was collected over lots of different methods, right? Some were focus groups, some were kind of open-ended survey questions. Others were, just different forms of consultation over several different periods of reform. And so likewise, it is it's just structured very differently. And this was a kind of a challenge for us. And also some of the forms, some of the fields where the narrative consultation input refer back to a question that's not included in the answer, right? So it'll just say, I think that's true, or something like this, right? That's thoroughly unuseful unless we somehow link it back to the broader framework. So these were all questions we had to figure out as to how, which fields of the data set to link that in ways that would, provide us with the robust answers we need, but without adding a bunch of superfluous information into the text. So we handled similar things. I'd be really interested to see the Brazilian data you're working with. I have in the back of my mind maybe a recollection that they recently digitized it and made it available. Is that what you're working
Yes.
with? Or yeah.
Yes, it's a database called Constituição dos Sonhos, which means like the Constitution of the Dreams or something like that. And it's available at the Senate website in Portuguese.
Yeah. And so
Can I interrupt? You
yeah,
should
please.
definitely, if you haven't seen it already, Natalia, look at Alex's book because he has a chapter on the postcards and the
I
processing of
was gonna
those,
say the
etc.
same thing.
Yeah.
Yeah, you
Yeah,
have a lot of
I
Brazilian
recently
aficionados on the call right now.
Yeah, I recently took a look at it, but I haven't read it yet, but I'll definitely check it out.
It's amazing, I can tell you. Yeah.
And I will say, Natalia, as you start to work on this project, I know Ashley kind of said it in jest, but seriously, if you do have questions, feel free to email me, feel free to email any of us. If you feel like you've reached a point where you want to implement some of these tools, we'd be happy to work with you one-on-one.
Because just to kind of close that out, the tools are designed to thus accommodate that kind of unevenness in the language by working with sentence level segments. It gives us enough. It gives the tools enough information to be able to effectively match content that you're working with in the text with the topics. And you can use other ontologies too. This is clearly something we're very keen to be doing too, is to be incorporating concepts from other people's conceptualizations of these topics too.
Thank you.
Yes.
Well, other comments or input or questions or anything for now? No question is too large or too small. Okay, well, so we will share the slides with all of you who've registered and this recording as well. So you'll have all of our contact information, our websites, links to everything that we've discussed today. As has been said by others as well, we are very keen to stay connected with you and with others who are working on these issues. So please, stay in contact with us, write to us if you have questions or just to share what you're working on. We're really keen. I don't, others have anything to close out with?
No, just a big thank you to all of you for being here, for participating, for sharing your thoughts. It means a lot to us to have the space to be able to share these tools, and we hope to have more in the future.
Yeah, and please stay in touch.
And
And
if you want to use the tools, just yes,
go ahead,
and if you
Guillermo.
want to use the tools, just send us an email and we can help you with everything you need.
Okay, well, I guess we'll leave it there for today. Thank you all so much for joining us. We look forward to staying in contact. Keep us posted on your research. Thanks so much.
Ciao, everybody. Bye.
Bye,
You too.
everybody.
Bye.
Thanks for coming.